Hello and welcome to NavTalk. NavTalk is proudly brought to you by the Navwealth Financial Group, helping you reach your destination in life on purpose. My name is Simon Prowse and I'll be your regular host for this series of podcasts. And I look forward to bringing you interviews and content on a broad range of topics. Topics that will be educational, inspirational, informative and at times fun. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to today's NavTalk. Today's session's entitled The Workplace of the Future by Stephen Minnett of Futurespace. Hi there, Stephen.
Hi Simon, how are you?
I'm great. Before we get into today's topic, which I think is going to be fascinating, I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Mr. Stephen Minnett. Stephen graduated UTS with a Bachelor of Architecture in 1989. He then commenced work at the time with Jackson, Teese, Chesterman and Wills before establishing Futurespace in 2001. Initially designing benchmark workplaces for the finance and banking sector, Stephen grew his trade and now describes himself as a workplace strategy leader with over 30 years' experience in various workplace strategies across a broad range of sectors. So without further ado, welcome Stephen.
Thank you, Simon.
And Stephen, with regard to Futurespace, why don't you tell us a little bit about your key clients that you work with?
Early on, our clients were primarily finance and banking sector leading up to the GFC, and we then had to move on from clients like Lehman Brothers to diversify into other sectors. So last 10 years, we've worked in technology sector with people like Google, Microsoft, REA.com, pharma with AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson, professional services with PwC, Aware Super, Minter Ellison. We've also worked with the government, with APRA, a current client, the Reserve Bank, the National Broadband Network, state government work for Department of Communities and Justice, another current client, and also local government with Albury City and Hume City Council. So really wide variety of experience.
Well, that's certainly an impressive resume for Futurespace. And given your experience with these clients, what are you seeing in the workplace environment?
Look, I think what's happened is obviously COVID has hit and it's really stalled people's workplace design. But I think we have to remember that prior to COVID, we were already going through an ever-increasing rate of change with workplace, and people were already starting to do some things we're seeing now post-COVID, and that's working more flexibly, working from different spaces. And what's happened is really COVID has supercharged that change in workplace design. And someone told me the other day, it's brought the 2030s to the 2020s in workplace design. And for someone like me who's obsessed about workplace, it's a fascinating thing to be looking at now as where are we going?
And what are we seeing in this workplace design and these changes that you're observing?
Uncertainty, I suppose. Two things that really surprised me when COVID impacted on the workplace. Firstly, that the National Broadband Network didn't melt down, kept going. But also how well so many organisations coped with working remotely. And I think there was probably a bit of a facing a crisis energy around that, and probably a bit of fatigue set in over time around that working remotely and the impact it's had. And we're now in a position where there's a lot of uncertainty about where do we go now with the workplace. A lot of organisations are in legacy workplaces that were set up pre-COVID and they're not sure what to do next.
And in terms of this pre and post COVID mix, if you like, is it one where we're seeing work spaces be shared, or what are you seeing in the way the trends are going now? We're sort of starting to return to work.
Well, I think firstly the hybrid work is not something that's going to go away. It's the new normal, and what it is in different organisations and sectors is something that's evolving. I think we can be confident we're not going to go back to the way workplaces used to be. So everyone's asking us, well, where are they going at the moment? And one of the problems we have with workplace design is that it's pretty slow to change. Lease Lease structures traditionally could be 5, 6, 7, 8 years. And effectively what the property sector does to tenants is say, tell me how much space you need about 7 or 8 years' time, and we'll give you an incentive to do a fit out. And now people don't know how they're going to be working in 7 or 8 months' time. So it makes those sort of decisions really difficult.
And when we're looking at a fit out for a workplace and you're trying to make it a place where people want to come to work and so forth, what are the key factors that you're looking at in that fit out and how it's going to attract the right people, if you like?
Yeah, I think that you've hit on something there with the attract people, because in an economy with really low unemployment and a war for talent, I don't think it's going to work to dictate to people when they have to be in the office and when not, because if your competitors don't do that, you'll lose. So really smart employers are trying to create a workplace experience that drives the behaviours they want. And that's really making the workplace earn the commute, if I could use that expression, so that people actually feel it's worthwhile to come into the office because it's giving them things that they don't get from home.
Right. And what are those typical things that you're looking at?
Yeah, look, I think in some cases it really depends on people's personal circumstances. How long is their commute? Are they living in a shared house where they're trying to work on the kitchen table, or do they have 3 children under the age of 5? There's a whole lot of good reasons for wanting to come into the workplace. But I think there's a growing realisation that there are some things that are better done remotely or by yourself, and there's obviously things that are better done together collaboratively.
And are we seeing that collaborative environment being the core, in, if you like, in the workplace? Is that what you...
Yeah, look, I think an old-fashioned workplace, the primary function was for people to come and do their work. And in some ways that model was broken anyway. We've engaged with a lot of organisations over the last 10 years as organisations became more efficient and moved to pretty much open plan workplaces. People would say to us that I can't get concentrated work done. I have to take it home or get out of the office. So there was something wrong with the workplace anyway if you had to get out of the office to do your work. But now really the workplace is the place to do your individual work. That's a secondary function. It's more about those social connections, working as a team, learning, mentoring, a whole lot of other things.
So what we might see in the future is that private work where we've actually got to put our head down and don't sort of share or collaborate is done in an environment like the home or a quiet place within the office, and then the rest of it is more this open plan collaborative type work.
Yes, I think so. I think if we look at the mix of space in an office, we're finding that there's a lesser requirement for individual open space, greater requirement for team or social spaces, but also a greater requirement for quiet spaces, individual spaces where people can concentrate and work, not just on their own individual work, but perhaps to connect with colleagues on Zoom or Teams or other platforms that aren't in the office. And we're also seeing a bit of a repurposing of meeting spaces with less client-facing meetings, but also more perhaps internal meetings between half a team who's in the office and perhaps some of the team who are working in other places.
Right. And in terms of that work environment, it sounds like we're going to have a great variety of different areas. The office space is going to be made up of multi-facets. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I think that's what's going to happen. And I think one of the key words is choice. With a hybrid work style, you've got a choice over where you do your work, not just home or office, but when you come into the office, where will you work? Do you want to sit down with your team and work collaboratively? Do you want to go to a quiet room and do individual work? Are you coming in for social, coffee, catch up, all sorts of different spaces? So the technology's got to support that mobility, not just between work and home, but once you're in the office, to be able to work around and work from where you choose.
You brought up an interesting point where people will have a hybrid and be able to come in or not come in or make a choice. How are you dealing with that when it comes to the share office or the size of the office space, the typical office space?
Yeah, that's probably the most difficult question. Some organisations are saying, look, You can work any way you want, anywhere you want, but we want the whole team in on Wednesday so they can connect. That sounds really good, but the impact of that is you've got to build the office for that peak. So you're really committing to the same size space as you've got now. You may be able to afford that, but there's a downside to that as well, in that a lot of the time the office is going to be pretty empty. So that office experience is not great to come and rattle around in a near empty office. It can be depressing. So it's a really difficult question as to how you make the most of the office in a utilisation sense, but also to how do you create that experience for people.
How give us a couple of cases that you're seeing out there. I mean, we're talking of quite a diverse range of options and businesses, yeah? Yeah,
look, there's some extreme examples of what people are doing. Atlassian, who are a very successful company, have said to their people, pretty much you don't have to come in ever, or maybe 4 times a year we'll get you together physically. The rest of the time you can choose where you work. And at the same time, they're spending over $1 billion in Sydney to try and create the best workplace in Sydney. And that's to really try and attract their people to come in. So they're not dictating, they're attracting. Other organisations are still trying to dictate 3-4 days a week in the office. There's a real mix out there. And I think we don't know yet where that will land. And I think it's going to be employee driven. If we go back to the shortage of talent, different hybrid workplace offers are going to become compelling in different industries, and you are going to have to offer people whatever the best experience is in their industry to attract the best people.
Yeah, I dare say that's going to change, which depending on the industry or the style of the business also, whether you need people in or the remote working is applicable, yeah?
That's right.
Interesting that you were talking about the utilisation. What are the examples you're seeing out there in terms of these shared spaces and how they're actually functioning in a real sense?
I think it's really interesting to try and analyse how people are using space as they start to come back to the office. And we're seeing organisations implementing pretty sophisticated ways of gathering that data. We're working with APRA at the moment on their headquarters in One Martin Place, and they are putting in a pretty sophisticated booking and monitoring system so that not only do they know when their people will be in the office, when do they want to be in the office, but when they come in, what are they doing? Are they working at an individual desk? Are they working collaboratively? Because the changes we're making to their office are really a hybrid, because they don't know how they'll work in a couple of years' time, but they really need that data to support the evolution of the space.
So as they're gathering this data, we could find that they'll actually tailor the space as they gather the info. Is that what
That's right. And we're putting in a variety of different, what I call workplace settings for collaborative work and individual work. We know they will support the functions, but we don't know yet which ones will prove to be most popular with their people. So this is a staged rollout, so we can then adjust the quantities of these spaces over time. And I think there's a realisation that people can no longer build, set and forget office space. Smart organisations are realising that it's going to be a continual evolution, and there's probably some different ways of funding that change in the future.
Yeah, that'll be very challenging because it's not a cheap exercise to fit out the office.
No, it's not. But I think perhaps service offerings where furniture is leased rather than bought, where you can swap out a certain percentage of space so you can make it evolve. I think also trying to provide spaces where teams can move things around, make spaces more hackable, more able for a team to customise an area when they're in.
So dynamic workspaces.
More dynamic. And unfortunately for the employer, probably more expensive workplaces in dollars per square metre, but then balanced against probably less overall space.
So what you're saying then, the overall spend on the fit out is going to be compensated by the size of the fit out.
And people looking for perhaps some different structures around rent, or perhaps even looking at buildings where there's co-working space or overflow space or space for meetings that they can use on a hourly or daily basis.
Oh, that's fascinating, Stephen. So if I was a client and I called you up and approached Futurespace about helping me with a design, how do you go about that process, and how do you unpack that?
I think one of the starting points for an engagement is to really understand how a business is working now and what it's been doing in the past, so we can then engage with the business to better understand perhaps what the future business objectives are and how that can be supported by space, how the culture is evolving in the organisation, what the desired culture is. It's important to get the individual viewpoints of key leaders in the organisation. We'll often do that with just leadership interviews, sometimes a workshop with the senior people to try and understand where they'd like the business to go. But it's also good to get the input of individuals, perhaps a focus group or a cross-section of people, to try and understand from them, what would make it a great place for them to work? Why would they want to come in there? And perhaps what's some of the things that have caused friction in their day previously and frustrate them with the office? What would they like to leave behind, as well as what would they like to take forward?
So it's an extensive information gathering.
Yes, and we also run online surveys. Sometimes people are a bit surveyed out in organisations. There have been a lot of surveys about how people work. So again, that's part of that information gathering to try and understand whether it's engagement surveys or other staff surveys, what can they provide us with as a starting point.
So in terms of the overall process, this information gathering stage is it fairly significant in its timeline, or how does that? I guess it really depends on the timeline the organisation's got to work to.
Some of these things can run in parallel, but other things where we're gathering feedback through surveys or analysis, we like to gather that, do that analysis, and then present that to the leaders to help inform the decisions that they make about the future.
So if I'm looking at potentially relocating, when would I start this process in your mind in terms of the information gathering? When should I open the door for Futurespace to come in?
As soon as possible. And I think it's not just a relocation. I think we've got a whole city full of people out there in legacy workplaces that were built pre-COVID, and they're not really supporting how they want to work in the future. And I understand people are nervous about what do they commit to, but in that war for talent, really, do you want to be there with an old legacy workplace, or do you want to be a workplace that's really reflecting what your people are asking for in the future?
So in terms of the budget, if you like, or for the relocation, and it can be quite, it's time consuming and it can be quite expensive in the fit out. How does this all fit into the mix, and what's it look like with the information gathering?
Look, I think the context for a budget for your workplace has to sit within the overall budget for a business, and business's biggest cost in most cases is people, and that's going to be a key thing in coming years, and providing the right space for people. Potentially, as we've said before, your rent may come down, but really the cost of committing to space over time is something where you really need to look closely at how much space you'll need in the future. And I think it's worth spending a bit of time and cost to get that right. So you go to market for the right amount of space rather than just a guess as to how you might need space in the future.
Yeah, that's pretty important. And I assume that when you think about it, you amortise that cost over your people and the length of tenure. It's probably not very large in the bigger scheme of it.
Look, I think very often a good workplace design for an organisation can save a significant percentage of the overall rent over a period of time. So it really pays for itself. In a new world of work, we don't know where it's going to land, and we need to approach how we do workplaces differently. We can't build it and leave it until we get another lease incentive in 8 years' time, because that won't support the business. So businesses need to look at not just the initial fit-out cost, but how can they commit to the evolution and change over the term of that lease. And I also think it's a fantastic time at the moment for people to look at, they may have a long lease still, but how can that space evolve? Can they perhaps divest themselves some of that space before the end of the lease.
So, Stephen, in summing up, how would you describe, or can you describe for us, what you think that workplace is of the future?
Look, I think it may not look that different to the way it looks now. The proportions of things will be different. We've talked about that being more team spaces, more social spaces, more open spaces. But I think the key thing really in that workplace is, how will people use it? That's going to be the big change. It's got to support the changes in behaviours. And I come back to that word choice. Allow people to work in the way that makes them most effective, and allow them to dictate how the space is used, not be in a space that dictates how they have to use it.
Yeah, great. So bring the power back to the people or the employees.
Absolutely. Well, they're going to have the power anyway, in terms of the war for talent. So unfortunately for the employer, you have got to respond to that, and you've got to provide that compelling experience to attract the best people and stop yourself losing your good people.
So a happy employee is a happy business.
Yes.
Some of the key takeouts for me from today, Stephen, is the hybrid workspace is here to stay. What that hybrid workspace may look like is probably a little bit up in the air, but it will probably fall back on the style of business and the way the business people work and how they need to work. There's really no one size fits all to the approach. The space utilisation is pretty critical, and the layout and the design needs to have some flexibility tailored into it to allow the business to move when it's in its space, given that they could be in the space for a long time. The process of fact finding and pre-fit out is pretty critical in your mind, and probably from one of my key takeouts for today, it's probably one of the fundamentals that probably is not looked at well. Is that a fair assumption?
I think so. And look, I think really finding out what your team want out of their physical space, what's going to encourage the behaviours you want in the workplace, what's going to make your people want to come in, because we're finding a tension at the moment between business owners who are perhaps wanting their people in more than their people are willing to be in. So really you've got to provide that space that encourages them, and also provide the technology. Something we haven't talked about a lot, but there's a supercharging of the development of technology to support hybrid ways of working, and there's a need to invest in that. One of the biggest tensions in existing spaces now is, as people come back, so many people are sitting there in the open plan trying to do video conferencing or Zooming, etc., and that's impacting on people around them. So technology, acoustics, how will that work better? And really, what's the ways that a team can connect when half the team in the office and the other half of the team are elsewhere, and how can technology support that?
And that's really important one that we haven't dived in on. Are you seeing some pretty nifty technology evolve? And
I think it's a watch this space in terms of what people will be using in the future.
Oh, wow. Oh, well, that was fantastic. And the last probably message that I've got is it's all about investing in our people. This talent shortage and getting people to want to work and enjoy that work environment will be one of your key ingredients for success. Is that fair?
Absolutely. And I think organisations that offer a compelling hybrid work experience to attract the best people will do well, and companies that are frozen in fear as to not knowing what to do will suffer, because they'll start to lose out in the war for talent.
Yeah. Stephen, if anyone wants to get a hold of you and your business and look at really this information gathering stage, are your doors open to all and sundry? Or
Certainly, and www.futurespace.com.au as our website. So there's also examples of some of the projects and other things. And we're, of course, happy to talk to people about where the workplace is going.
Thank you very much, Stephen. I really appreciate your time and you giving us your insights into the future of workspace.
Thank you, Simon. It's a pleasure.
Thanks for joining us today for NavTalk. You can listen to other podcasts in the NavTalk series via YouTube or where you get your favourite podcasts, or simply search NavTalk. Be sure to follow Navwealth on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook or Twitter. And please, if there are any particular topics you would like us to cover for a future episode, let us know via our website. I'm Simon Prowse. Until we talk again.